The night Thabo betrayed her with her own blood, Lerato did not scream, she did not cry, she simply sat still, staring at the ceiling as if carving a plan into the darkness itself. In that silence, a dangerous seed was planted. To the world, Lerato was still the soft, obedient wife, but in her heart, something had shifted forever. Lerato had met Thabo in her early 20s, a charming man whose laughter could fill an entire room. At first, their marriage was everything she dreamed of: Sunday brunches with friends, whispered prayers before bed, and promises of forever. But as time passed, cracks began to appear. Thabo had wandering eyes, and soon, wandering hands. At first, Lerato convinced herself it was just temptation, that he would change, that love could heal what lust had broken. But Thabo's betrayal grew bolder. He didn't hide it well, and Lerato heard the whispers in the market, the pitiful glances from other women who knew more than they should. Still, she endured. A wife must be patient, she told herself. A man will eventually return home. Yet patience has its limits. And Lerato's limit was crossed the day she discovered Thabo had not only betrayed her, but with her own sister, Nelly. That night, as Lerato sat alone in the kitchen, her hands trembling over the same pot she had cooked in for years, something inside her broke. Her tears didn't fall this time. Instead, her eyes hardened. "You've played with my heart, Thabo, but now, I will play with your life." She did not shout. She did not confront him. No, Lerato understood something deeper: anger makes noise, but revenge requires silence. Over the next few days, she began her plan. In her room, hidden from curious eyes, she crushed glass bottles into fine powder, grinding them carefully until they were smooth enough to look harmless. Just like sugar, just like salt. Invisible. Deadly. Each grain was a secret, each speck a slow death waiting to happen. She stored it in a small container, tucked behind the spices in her cupboard. Every time she looked at it, her lips curved into a smile that no one else ever saw. The first time she stirred it into his food, her hands shook. Thabo sat across the table, laughing loudly, boasting about his day as if he were a king. He never noticed her silence, never noticed the careful way she watched him lift the spoon to his lips. That night, he complained only of a small stomach ache, nothing serious. Lerato simply rubbed his back, whispering, "Don't worry, my love. I will take care of you." And so began the slow unraveling of Thabo's life. A little more powder each day. A little more silence from Lerato. Neighbors still saw her as the devoted wife. Thabo still thought himself untouchable. But death had already been invited into their home, sitting quietly at the dinner table, waiting for the right moment to strike. In the dead of night, when the township slept and only the sound of dogs barking in the distance filled the air, Lerato sat alone in the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she held an empty bottle, its glass glittering under the dim light. With steady determination, she wrapped it in cloth and hammered it down, piece by piece, until sharp fragments lay scattered before her. But Lerato was not done. She ground those fragments further, using a stone, until they turned into fine powder, smooth, invisible, and deadly. It looked harmless, almost like maize flour. Yet Lerato knew that each speck carried the promise of pain. She poured the powder into a small jar and tucked it behind her spices. Every time she glanced at that jar, her lips curled into a smile, not of joy, but of satisfaction. For weeks she had carried the weight of betrayal, the humiliation of being mocked in her own home. But now, the weight felt lighter. She had a weapon, one that needed no gun or knife. A weapon that killed slowly, unnoticed. A weapon born of patience just like her pain. The following evening, Lerato made dinner as usual. Thabo strutted into the kitchen, humming a tune, bragging about how everyone respected him at work. Lerato kept her face soft, listening, nodding, even laughing when he expected her to. But her hands worked carefully, sprinkling the deadly powder into his stew. She stirred slowly, whispering in her heart, "Eat, my husband. Eat and let justice take its course." When they sat at the table, Thabo ate greedily, smacking his lips, praising her cooking. "Hi, Lerato, no woman can cook like you," he said proudly, completely unaware of what he was swallowing. Lerato smiled faintly, watching each spoonful disappear into his mouth. For a brief moment, her heart raced. Would he taste it? Would he notice something strange? But Thabo simply ate, wiping his plate clean. That night, he only complained of a slight stomach ache. Lerato rubbed his back gently, whispering, "Don't worry, my love. Tomorrow you'll feel better." Days turned into weeks, and Lerato continued her deadly ritual. A little powder in the porridge, a little in the stew, some in the pap. Not too much, never enough to kill at once. She wanted it slow. She wanted to see him suffer the way she had suffered in silence. At first, the changes were small. Thabo felt tired more often, sometimes clutching his stomach, blaming the food he bought at work. Lerato encouraged him to rest, bringing him tea, massaging his shoulders, acting every bit the perfect wife. Neighbors began to notice how caring she seemed. They would smile and whisper, "Thabo is blessed, Lerato is such a good woman." And Thabo, blind to the trap he was in, started believing it too. He would boast to his friends, "Even with all my mistakes, Lerato never leaves me. That's a real wife." He didn't know that loyalty had died long ago, and what sat at his table was no longer love, but vengeance dressed in kindness. And so, the game began. Every meal, every laugh, every smile from Lerato carried poison hidden beneath it. Thabo thought himself a king in his castle, but what he didn't realize was that his castle was already burning, and the fire was in his own kitchen. Thabo had always been a strong man. He walked with his chest out, laughed louder than anyone in the room, and carried himself like a king among his friends. But lately, something had changed. His shoulders drooped, his eyes grew dull, and his laughter came less often. At first, he dismissed it as fatigue. "Work is just draining me," he would say. But deep inside, his body was warning him that something was terribly wrong. One morning, Thabo woke up clutching his stomach. Beads of sweat rolled down his forehead as he groaned in pain. Lerato rushed to his side, her face painted with worry. "How? Thabo, are you all right? Let me make you tea," she said softly, placing a wet cloth on his head. To anyone watching, she looked like the perfect wife, desperate to ease her husband's suffering. Only Lerato knew that she was the reason behind his agony. Thabo decided to see a doctor. After running several tests, the doctor found nothing alarming. "Perhaps it's ulcers, or maybe food poisoning," he suggested, prescribing medication and advising rest. Thabo left the clinic confused but relieved. He returned home to Lerato, who welcomed him with open arms and a warm meal, a meal that carried the very poison the doctor could never detect. As weeks passed, Thabo's health continued to decline. His once strong frame began to wither. He grew thinner, weaker, and more irritable. Some nights, he would lie awake, clutching his stomach, asking Lerato to rub his back until he fell asleep. And she would sit there, stroking his skin gently, whispering soothing words, her face calm, her eyes cold. To him, it felt like love. To her, it was victory. Neighbors and relatives praised Lerato for her patience. "This woman is a blessing," they would say. "Even when her husband is sick, she never leaves his side." They admired how she carried groceries, how she prepared meals, how she stayed up late to care for him. Lerato nodded politely at their compliments, hiding the wicked satisfaction burning in her heart. She had built a perfect mask, and no one suspected what lay beneath it. Meanwhile, Thabo grew desperate. His confidence was gone. He stopped boasting, stopped flirting with other women, even distanced himself from Naledi. Some days, he would sit silently at the table, staring at Lerato with guilty eyes. Once, he muttered, "I know I've wronged you, Lerato, but you're still here. Thank you." Lerato only smiled faintly, placing another spoonful of food on his plate. She didn't need to reply. His gratitude meant nothing to her now. By the end of that month, Thabo was no longer the man people once knew. He had become a shadow of himself, a prisoner in his own body. Yet no one, not even Thabo, realized that the prison had been built inside his own home. And the jailer was none other than the woman who tucked him into bed every night. Naledi, Lerato's younger sister, had stopped visiting the house as often. The affair that once seemed like a secret thrill now weighed on her like a curse. Every time she saw Thabo's frail body, guilt pierced her heart. He no longer looked like the confident man who once whispered sweet lies into her ears. Now, he looked like a man being slowly eaten from the inside. By now, Thabo could barely leave his bed. His once loud laughter was gone, replaced by groans of pain and labored breathing. Lerato tended to him tirelessly, spoon-feeding him, wiping his sweat and whispering praise over him. To anyone watching, she was a wife in love. But in truth, she was a hunter waiting for her prey to collapse. One night, as Thabo lay weak, he reached for Lerato's hand. "I've been a fool," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I hurt you. I hurt us. But still, you stayed. You're the only woman who truly loves me." His eyes glistened with tears. For the first time, he seemed genuinely sorry. For a moment, Lerato felt her chest tighten. Not with love, but with the cruel irony of his words. Love. If only he knew that the food he begged her to serve was slowly killing him. If only he knew that her hands, the same ones stroking his forehead, had already signed his death sentence. She forced a smile, whispering back, "Rest now, my husband. I am here." Neighbors marveled at her devotion. "Lerato is an angel," they said. "Even after everything, she cares for him like a baby." Women in the community envied her patience, wishing they had her strength. Lerato let them believe the lie. In fact, she fed it. Thabo began confessing his sins, apologizing for every woman, every lie, every betrayal. He even begged God to forgive him, his voice trembling in prayer. But Lerato felt no pity. His regret was too late. In her heart, justice was already being served, one poisoned bite at a time. As she tucked him in that night, Lerato's smile lingered. To Thabo, it was love. To Lerato, it was triumph. And yet, a small shadow of emptiness crept into her heart, because she realized that no matter how much he suffered, it could never undo what he had done with Nelody. The end came quietly, like a whisper carried by the wind. Lerato had prepared a special meal that night, his favorite stew, spiced to perfection. But hidden within the rich aroma was a deadly dose, more than she had ever used before. This would be his last supper. Thabo, weak and trembling, struggled to sit up. Lerato helped him, lifting the spoon to his mouth. He ate slowly, smiling faintly between bites. "Thank you, Lerato," he whispered. "Even after all I've done, you're still here." His words cracked like glass under pressure. As he swallowed the final spoonful, his body betrayed him. His chest tightened, his breath grew shallow, and panic spread across his face. He clutched his stomach, groaning, gasping for air. Lerato held his hand, her face calm, her eyes fixed on his. "Shoo, rest, Thabo. Rest." He looked at her one last time, eyes wide with confusion, perhaps realization. But before he could speak, his strength failed him. His head slumped onto her lap, his final breath fading into silence. For a long moment, Lerato sat motionless, staring at his lifeless body. She expected to feel joy, maybe relief. Instead, she felt nothing. Just a cold emptiness that spread through her chest like smoke in a hollow room. When neighbors came the next morning, they found Lerato weeping beside her husband. "He died in my arms," she cried, and the community wrapped her in comfort, praising her devotion till the very end. They saw a grieving widow. They did not see the executioner. But as Lerato washed her hands that night, she caught her reflection in the mirror. And in her own eyes, she saw something terrifying, a woman who had gotten away with murder, but lost herself in the process. Days turned into weeks, and Thabo was laid to rest. Neighbors continued to praise Lerato for her strength, bringing food, offering prayers, and calling her woman of faith. But when the crowds left, silence filled the house, a silence heavier than death itself. Nelody stopped coming altogether. She couldn't bear to face her sister, nor the memory of the man they both betrayed. Guilt ate at her, but fear kept her silent. Deep down, she suspected Lerato knew more than she let on. But she dared not ask. Some truths are too dangerous. Lerato carried herself with grace in public, but behind closed doors, she was haunted. At night, she heard Thabo's groans, his last breath echoing in her ears. She dreamt of glass shattering, of powders turning into smoke. In her dreams, Thabo would rise from his grave, whispering, "I know what you did, Lerato." And then came the whispers in the community. Some wondered how Thabo could fall sick so quickly and waste away so completely. A few asked questions. Was it really illness? Did the doctors miss something? The more they spoke, the more Lerato's heart raced. She smiled by day, but at night, she feared the mask would slip. One evening, as she locked the cupboard where the last of the glass powder remained, she froze. A voice behind her said softly, so it was true. Lerato spun around, her heart pounding. There stood Nelody, her eyes filled not with fear, but with quiet certainty. For a long moment, the sisters stared at each other, the weight of betrayal, guilt, and murder hanging between them. Lerato's lips parted, but no words came out. The silence was louder than any confession. And in that silence, Lerato finally realized, her revenge had killed her husband, but it had also bound her to a new prison. A prison of secrets, where freedom was impossible. Because in South Africa, as in life, no sin stays buried forever.